Hey everyone, Stefan Spencer here, and I am so excited to have as our guest today Ariel Garten. She is trained as a neuroscientist, psychotherapist, and is the co-founder of Muse, the brain-sensing headband that helps you meditate. In fact, I have one right here that I'm holding in my hand. So if you're just listening, you won't be able to see it, but it looks pretty cool to put it on your head. This little stripe that senses your not just your brain waves now, but the version 2 tracks your heart rate and some other things too. So Muse gives you that real-time feedback during your meditation that helps you to enhance your practice if you are already meditating, or at least just begin and give you some positive feedback so that you'll continue and do it more often. So when Ariel isn't reading brains literally, you can find her on stages around the world, inspiring people to overcome the barriers that exist only in their own minds. Ariel's been featured on CNN, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and many more. Ariel, thank you for joining us. Great to have you.
My pleasure. It's an honor and a joy to be here.
So I'd love to start with your origin story. How did you end up creating this Muse headband that's taken the world by storm? I had version 1 back in the early days, like many years ago. So you guys have been around for a while. Like how did you get started? How did you end up creating this headband and getting it out there into the marketplace?
So it's a very long journey that has taken me to, it's been a very long journey to create this device, because the device is so unique. It encompasses such a broad range of different practices and technologies. My own background comes equally from arts and sciences. My mom was an artist, so I always grew up making stuff and creating beautiful experiences for people. And I was a scientist. And along the way, I became fascinated with the brain. You know, the brain is the thing that is the basis of our entire experience of life, how we see, think, perceive, feel, act, etc. Yet we have very little access to it. We have no way to really know what's going on in our mind. We have no way to touch the organ that processes our world around us. And I recognize that if we could create more technologies and experiences that let us interact directly with our mind, we'd probably be able to do some pretty great things. So I started working with Dr. Steve Mann. He was one of the inventors of the wearable computer, and he had an early brain-computer interface device, an early BCI system that let you interact with stuff directly with your brain activity. It was a single electrode that you would place on the back of your head, and by shifting your brain state, by focusing or relaxing, we could then program things to happen within your technological world. So you would focus and a light would get brighter. You would relax and it could change an audio landscape. And with this early technology, we started to create concerts, audio experiences where people were literally making music with their mind. And I stood back from this work that we were doing in the laboratory and said, oh my God, we are literally letting people interact with the world directly with their brain. And the world needs to know about this. I think this can be a business idea, and we totally have to make this a reality. So I got together with my co-founders, Chris Amony. He was one of Steve's master's students, and he was really responsible for making Steve's iTap system with him. That's like Steve's version of Google Glass before Google Glass existed. And Trevor Coleman, who was really fantastic at making experiences that people loved. And the three of us got together to try to figure out what to do with this technology. And at first we thought it was about literally controlling technology with our brain. So we made thought-controlled toasters and thought-controlled slot car machines and thought-controlled literally anything you could think of. We had a thought-controlled beer tap. You'd focus on it and the beer would pour. And then we did this crazy project at the Vancouver 2010 Winter Olympics that allowed people to control the lights on the CN Tower, the Canadian Parliament buildings, and Niagara Falls with their brain from across the country. So we went really far down this rabbit hole of figuring out how we control technology with our brain. And what we recognized through this process was the coolest thing was not controlling technology with your mind, because frankly, it's easier to make toast by pressing the button with your hand than it is trying to focus on the toast to crisps to just the right degree. We recognized the best use of this technology was really to help you understand what was going on in your own mind. And that as we were teaching people to shift their brain state and showing them what was going on in their mind with, an outcome in the real world, we recognized we were actually teaching people the skill of ultimately meditating. We were teaching them to focus. We were teaching them to relax. We were showing them some measure of what was happening inside of their brain. They could see the impact of a shift in their brain in the world itself. And we recognized that this incredible technology's best use was to really help you understand your own mind.
Right. And so is this what neurofeedback is, where you're listening to your brain waves in a sense, and your unconscious mind is then making some corrections so that you can go deeper into a certain brainwave state, or quiet your mind, or what have you? Or is this something a little different than traditional neurofeedback?
It's a little bit different than traditional neurofeedback, but based on the same principles. So in traditional neurofeedback, you're looking just at alpha, beta, theta. You're looking at the band passes. And for us, we started there. So in the early experiments we were doing, you would focus to increase your beta waves, which would make a light brighter. You would relax, which would increase your alpha waves, which would, change something else. And as we've now been working with Muse for the last 10 years, longer. We started in the research lab in 2003. We've become significantly more sophisticated in the type of brain activity we pick up and how we give you reinforcement and feedback from it.
So what would be some examples? Because when I was I went to 40 Years of Zen, which is Dave Asprey's company. We did my wife and I, Orion and I, did a week-long program there. And one of the main outcomes they were after was to increase the alpha waves, so that you could get into a peak state, get into flow state, and stay there for longer. And also, one of the interesting side benefits that happened out of 40 Years of Zen for me was it unlocked memories that I hadn't had for over 40 years, which was really awesome. I thought those memories were lost, and not that I really thought about it. I just thought, that's just natural that you kind of lose what happened during your childhood. That's kind of how your brain handles making more room. Kind of like you run out of room on your hard drive, you got to free up some space. So, but then I thought, okay, this is pretty wild. I clearly have other memories that are that are in there and able to be unlocked too. So then I started doing a neurofeedback here in LA. I went to Peak Brain Institute, Dr. Andrew Hill's facility, and did a bunch of sessions there. And it was really interesting, but I understand it is different. And you're not doing it at your home at your own convenience. It's not as easy as just picking up a headband and putting it on. You have to hop in the car, or with 40 Years of Zen, probably fly across the country and dedicate an entire
Spend $40,000, however much it is these days.
Yeah. So it's 15,000 was the last I heard, but for a week, that's pretty pricey and out of many people's budgets. But yeah, so I would love to kind of juxtapose this neurofeedback that you get to maybe unlock memories, brain wave states that you're not in enough, that you'd like to be in more, versus getting some feedback for your brain that you're on the path in terms of quieting your mind and getting those little birds, getting the recoveries and all that. So I've been playing with my the Muse 2, and I just love to get some juxtaposition of the two things.
Awesome. So with Muse as a meditation tool, what we're looking at is you being in focused attention versus mind wandering. So the basic meditation practice that most people learn first, the foundation practice, is a focused attention practice. And in focused attention practice, you focus your attention on your breath. Your mind begins to wander. At that point, you notice that your mind has wandered, and you choose to come back to your breath. And what we've done is we've developed an algorithm that very sensitively knows when you're in focused attention versus when your mind is wandering. Alpha is a large component of being in focused attention, but that's not the only thing that's going on. It's a very sort of old school way of looking at the brain to say, oh, you need to be in alpha, beta, theta, more alpha is better. So what we did is we looked at literally thousands, now millions of minutes of EEG during meditation. And we have an algorithm that knows focused attention versus mind wandering. And what we're training you to do is to be aware of your own mental state. We're training you to come back to that state of focused attention, which is a large component of alpha, but that's not the only part of it. And then to be able to identify when your brain has moved off of that, build your metacognition, and then return yourself back to that state.
So did you like kind of practice or use yourself as a guinea pig as you were honing in on this, or did you use focus groups, or like what did who was the biggest guinea pig in this fine tuning process?
So I would have been a terrible guinea pig because I was a terrible meditator. In a lot of senses, I was like patient number one, the person who sucked at meditating because my brain bounced all over the place and I needed to learn how to meditate, and creating Muse was part of the process of doing that well, finally. For experts, we used real 50,000 hour plus meditators. We would literally sit on top of a mountain as an expert meditator would jump from jhana to jhana, state to state, categorizing those states via EEG. And then once we had a library of expert meditators, we then went on to categorize a library of novice meditators, because you can't just say this is what an expert's brain looks like, and as a novice learns to meditate, well, they should just be like an expert, and when you give them feedback as an expert, that'll do it. It doesn't. There's such a big divide. And so we then understood what a novice's brain looks like through this process, and then iteratively over literally 10 years started the process of building this tool. I guess we've been working on Muse as a meditation tool since 2011. So it's been 8 years of building Muse as a meditation tool, sort of 15 years of working with the technology in general.
So do you still suck at meditating?
No. I'm glad to say I no longer suck at meditating.
Okay. So
there was a sort of magic moment that came a few months in after using the Muse feedback, as we were building it, where I was like, oh, this is what it's supposed to be like. This is the state that people talk about. And it was kind of like, I describe it like when I was 15, I would hear love songs on the radio all the time. And I'd be like, why do people sing about love all the time? What's the big deal? And then I was in love and I heard a love song. I was like, oh, that's why they sing about love. Wow, this stuff is really good. So when
awesome.
I finally got it, it was like, oh, okay, now that like 2,000 years of wisdom that I've been reading about finally makes sense.
So is that kind of like a permanent shift? Like once you've learned how to ride a bike, you never forget? Or is it where you have to just kind of stay on the wagon? You could fall off the wagon and it's easy to fall off, but it's easy to fall back on or get back on the wagon. Is like what's that process like? Because I haven't gotten there yet. I got to an awakening experience, which is different. That was when I went to India on a Tony Robbins Platinum Partner trip, and one of the oneness monks touched me on the head and zapped me with energy. It's called a diksha. It's a oneness blessing, and there was one in particular, really high energy, like very powerful monk, touched me on the forehead, and I had this experience. It's bizarre, amazing, beautiful, incredible, life-changing. I'm curious if you had any kind of experience like that when you had that special experience where you suddenly got it.
I've had quite a number of experiences like that, and many more experiences I'm sure are still ahead of me. In the scheme of meditators, I'm still a novice, even though I feel like I've got a fair understanding under my belt. But as I continue to practice and learn different methodologies and push myself in different directions, I continue to open up. And there are lots of moments where I'm sitting there with myself where you have insight, where you can see yourself in new ways, where you can see the connection between things. But it also comes from doing lots of practices. And on the being zapped, meeting the Dalai Lama, I've met him a few times. And when I met him most recently, I reached out and he touched me on the arm. And I have never felt such a jolt of electricity through my body, barring the one time I accidentally electrocuted myself on a telephone when I was a kid. Wow. The Dalai Lama touched my arm and it was just like literally like I had been electrocuted. And it was just like my arm was buzzing, my body was buzzing, I was alive. It was insane. So I no sense of awakenness came from it. Just the unbelievable recognition of the physical, energetic power of this human being.
That's amazing. Have you ever gotten hugged by Amma, the hugging saint?
Yeah. So I identify with you in that energetic moment.
I'm curious, did you ever get hugged by Amma, the hugging saint?
Not yet. No, but I imagine that will be beautiful when it happens.
Yeah, she's hugged millions of people. I've gotten several hugs from her. My wife had a really profound experience getting hugged by her. I mean, it's amazing and wonderful. I haven't had any zapping sort of experience out of getting a hug by her, but it's pretty awesome. Yeah, definitely worth waiting in line for 6 or 8 hours for. So, is there for the novice meditator any kind of hurdle that they should be aware of? Like for me, I'm a novice meditator. I'm not really into it. My form of meditating in the morning is doing the Anabacoa prayer, which is a Kabbalistic prayer. It's from Kabbalah, and that helps ground me, connect me to the Creator, to the fabric of creation as well. And it only takes me a couple minutes, but I'm just scanning the Hebrew letters. I'm contemplating each line. Each line of the 7-line prayer has an area of focus, like on perseverance or on seeing the bigger picture and connecting to the tree of life instead of the tree of knowledge, all this sort of stuff. So that helps me, but it's not anything like quieting your mind and just stopping the chatter, which is incessant for me. I'm like, my mind is always busy. I'm prolific with ideas, and I know that it would be good for me to become an expert meditator, but then I get this performance anxiety, especially when I put on the headgear, and I'm like wanting to have it be quieter than it is, and that the weather, the sound, the feedback is making it worse. So I'm like, I don't want that. I want it the other way. I want it quieter, and so I get this performance anxiety. Is that normal?
Okay, so totally normal. We're human beings. And one of the most important lessons that meditation teaches us is non-judgment, so that you can experience the things happening in your body and mind without judging them. Because what we resist persists. One of my favorite quotes from Jung. So as we build a tense relationship with the thing we don't want, we're spending more and more time looking at it. So we're like, my mind is so noisy. This is so frustrating. I'm so terrible at this. We only build more and more and more dialogue that scaffolds on each other as we build more emotion around it, which then fuels more energy paying attention to the thing we don't want. And so what you have to train yourself to do in meditation is to let go of the thoughts and to do it without judgment. So we all have a million thoughts that go through our minds as we meditate. That's super normal. We are just human beings. Thank God we have active brains. What you want to learn to do is to make the choice not to follow them. So you sit there, you focus your attention on your breath, a thought comes in, you see that it's a thought, at which point you have a choice to follow that thought or to just let it go and let it pass and return your attention back to your breath. And the more you just let go of the thought, let go of any tension, let go of any expectation, let go of any judgment, the more you're able to sit with the stillness of your breath and find quiet there. And that is how the mind quiets. It is not through fight. It is through acceptance and letting go.
That's interesting that you say judgment, because that word specifically is tied to my what in Kabbalah is referred to as your tikkun, which is your soul correction, what you're here on earth to do to elevate your consciousness and your soul. And I'm an expert at judging. So something I work on, and I've gotten better at, the non-judgment, the just accepting not just others, but myself too. And it's a journey.
And there's a place for judgment. Judgment and discernment have tremendous value in our lives. But like anything, you want to be able to turn it off. Because as we go through life judging ourselves, often very harshly, we create a lot more difficulty for ourselves than we need to. Mm-hmm. We create a lot of othering. We create a lot of disturbance within the self through this active judgment that just wastes space and wastes emotional energy, which doesn't need to be wasted. So as you let go of the judgment, you let go of the resistance, you can just exist in what is. You can exist in the flow. You can exist in the abundance. You can exist in just the possibility of being. And you recognize all the judgment you thought you needed to have, those were all just stories. And once you start letting go of those stories, life actually becomes very easy. Because frankly, in a lot of ways, life is really easy. And it is our thinking and our judgment and our frustration and our, layering of emotions with thoughts with more emotions that create the complexities and dramas and traumas in our life that once we drop them, we actually realize everything actually is fine. I am safe. I am in a good place. I can make money. I can have a family. And as you create dramas and traumas, you create the kinds of things that push you away from what just naturally is.
Yeah. So what are some examples of how we create dramas and traumas? Because I think a lot of us feel like, life is just sometimes conspiring against us. I mean, I believe from having that spiritual awakening in India that life happens for us, not to us, and that we live in a friendly universe. But I was skeptical before that. I was an agnostic, questioning, doubting kind of person. And, for the scientist kind of empirical evidence kind of person who's listening to this, what do you tell them about this idea that we're creating or choosing the traumas that have happened in our lives, even if it happened in our childhood when we were very young and we had no agency? What would you tell somebody from a kind of metaphysical, spiritual perspective on this topic?
So first, that's a fascinating question that I've never been asked, and it's awesome. So just to lay the groundwork for this, I'm Jewish of background. I'm actually atheistic. I don't believe in a God. I don't believe that the world is predetermined in any way. I don't believe that things unfold the way they should. I just believe that we exist and we can make choices within our life about how to experience the world that we're in. And, if you take the most simple example of having a fight with your spouse that morning, you can continue to, throughout the rest of the day, ruminate or brew on the fight that you have. You can think about how they were wrong and bad. You can think about all of this ways that this would drive the two of you apart and how this means that this is not the partner for you and not the life that you want. Or you could, at the beginning of the argument, choose to say, this is another human being. I accept their perspective. I accept that difficult things sometimes happen. I accept that I'm here to work through it with this person because that's the choice that I've made. Anytime a difficult emotion arises, you can experience it, send your own emotional sense love, fulfill yourself with that love and fulfill the other person with that love and come out of it very quickly and very beautifully. So we are constantly making choices about the world that we live in and how we experience it. To look at it from a different angle, I realized a few years ago that lying in my incredibly safe home in downtown Toronto, which is a very safe city, with the locked doors of my very safe neighborhood, I always felt in the back of my head like somebody was going to come in and strangle me. It was like just the subtlest, tiniest little thought that I had. And it always left me feeling a little bit unsafe, even when I was in complete and total safety. As safe as with my big, strong husband next to me, there's nothing happening. And I realized that I had watched a movie on the airplane when I was about 10 years old with a scene where a man in black comes in at night into a woman's bedroom and strangles her. And that little bit had been carried inside me this entire time and was constantly telling me that I was unsafe. And as a result, as I went through the world, I constantly went through the world with this heightened level of anxiety. It was very subtle and with a small feeling of unsafety. And as a woman, you're constantly told you're unsafe. And as I recognized that and chose to purge myself of that experience, chose to say, okay, now I see what it is. I see this was not relevant to my current situation. This was a story. I had clearly overblown it. And it took a lot of work to really heal myself from what was minor trauma. It wasn't something that happened to me. And I even had other actual traumas in my childhood that I recognized that I carried. And as I chose to go back and through, psychotherapy and work, heal those traumas, you recognize that you don't need to replay old stories, that you are a capable, functional human being who can feel whole, who can feel fully safe, who can feel fully loved. And these stories that you carry around through your life that build up the scar tissue can actually be pulled away. The layers can be pulled back. Because in reality, the world that we live in is fundamentally a good place. The people that we are fundamentally good people. We are all fundamentally loved. And it's so easy to forget that and feel this underlying sense of, lack of worth or lack of fulfillment or lack of safety. And that's due to layers of conditioning. And those layers of conditioning you can choose to not buy into. You can choose to peel back. You can choose to heal, to live fully, completely comfortably in your current life.
Yeah. Sometimes, though, that requires getting some help, like a hypnotherapist to help
Totally.
you or somebody like that. Did you utilize hypnotherapy or any other modalities to kind of purge that false belief and that traumatic memory from 9-10 years old?
Totally. So I was actually practicing psychotherapist for a decade. And as a practicing therapist, you also do a lot of therapy. So I've done hypnotherapy. I was trained in NLP. NLP is a great methodology. I used, Gestalt, all sorts of different forms of psychotherapy. And really where I got to in going through and purging the traumas was the ability to watch my mind and watch my body and watch when it was diving into a story that was not true and not useful. And so one of the most useful therapies that I have done is behavioral therapy where you intentionally go towards things that you are afraid of. So you recognize that fear is this thing that just fires when it thinks it needs to, but most of the time it does not. So, we go through our lives with subtle fears that come up when really we're actually fine. Amygdala stores all of these, relatively inconsequential things that it thinks is really meaningful, and it continues to fire anytime it thinks anything feels anything like those previous situations, like you're lying in bed in your safe bed and you're remembering a story from when you were 10, and all of a sudden your amygdala starts firing because a pattern matched at a time when a pattern shouldn't have been matched. It looked or smelled the same, but was not the same. And so as you start to go into your fear, you recognize that fear doesn't need to rule you. Because most of the time, what you're avoiding in your life is the sensation of fear. We navigate through so much of our lives just trying to avoid feeling things because we think that feeling it will be bad. So we don't volunteer to get up and give a speech that would honor somebody or honor ourselves because we're like, oh, that would be scary. I don't want to be looked at. There's all of these things that we don't do because we don't want the feeling of fear that's associated with it. So we just shy back. We don't go up and network in the way that we want to because we're afraid of talking to that person. So we shy back. And when you lean into your fear and you feel it fully and you're doing the thing and feeling the fear, you recognize that fear is not something to be afraid of. Fear is just a bunch of sensations riding through your body, and you can ride that. Big deal.
Yeah.
And from that moment forward, fear no longer has power over you.
Yeah, that is profound. And I actually learned this 5 years ago, reading the book The Tools, which are 5 amazing tools. It's a book written by 2 psychotherapists. And these were the most practical, immediately useful tools that they had developed during their many years of practice. And the first tool is running towards the fear. And the way that they defined it or illustrate it was, imagine this dark cloud. And that dark cloud is your fear. Instead of just facing it, what if you ran towards it and then through it? And on the other side is your idyllic life or whatever goal you're after. And the way that they discovered this tool, one of the co-authors, he asked a childhood friend, a high school friend, while they were both in high school, what his secret to success was. He was a football player, and he was all state. He was just phenomenally good. But he wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the strongest. He just had this mindset about him. And the friend, the psychotherapist, wanted to know what was behind that. And the guy said, first thing I do on the field is I run straight towards getting tackled by the most, the biggest, strongest, most intimidating football player on the opposing team. And once I've done that, I'm invincible the rest of the game. So he actually ran towards the fear. And so that was the metaphor that this psychotherapist used to help his people that would come into his office. And then he wrote a book about it, and that tool was profound. Oh, and the second tool, which I think you're going to love as well, is how to fill up somebody you're in conflict with love from the universe. So you just imagine that that person is in front of you, and you fill them up with love from you, and then instead of you being depleted, you then afterwards fill yourself up with love from the universe. And while you're filling them up with love, so you actually visualize this love transferring kind of energetically into the person in front of you, and you just imagine what that's like for them to feel that and experience that, and like the sensations of it. So I did this with my my aunt, who I was not close to. I hadn't spoken to for several decades. I lived with her for a couple years when I was a child, and there were not so great experiences. So I didn't forgive her for decades and didn't have any contact with her. And then I did this little exercise, and I visualized her, and then I decided to give her a call and reconnect with her. We had a wonderful conversation. She had changed a lot, and she ended up coming to visit a couple months later, and she got to meet my kids for the first time, and they were already teenagers, and so the unforgiveness is really that's that quote about taking the poison, hoping to hurt the other person. But, whatever that quote is.
You're constantly drinking the poison, hoping to poison the other person, but you only poison yourself.
Yeah. So just got to release that, and so she's part of my life again, and my kids' lives, and and I should have done that a long time ago, but that book really helped me. I don't know if you're familiar with the tools.
I'm not familiar with those specific tools, but definitely love is an extraordinarily powerful thing.
Yeah.
As a scientist and somebody who's very prominent in the biohacker community, I used to tend to shy away from talking about love. I'm like, are people just going to think I'm flaky or too feminine? But love is an extraordinary tool. I recently came to the understanding that I was unconditionally loved, and that has solved so many things inside my life. Like, I came from a background where my mother was super loving. I always knew that I was loved from her, but it felt like it was a bucket that needed to be filled. And when I actually I grokked that I was truly unconditionally loved at all times, that was the gift that I was given, and that's what I have, then so many other anxieties just dissolved away. The need for approval, the need to care about what my husband thought about me, the need, all of those needs that keep you in tense relationship with yourself or the world, so many of them just became meaningless as I had this internal sense of actually being loved. I didn't need that external validation. And, I've always deeply believed that if we as humans knew that we were fully loved, fully worthy, and fully safe, all three things, we would just be glorious. All of the dysfunction, most of the mental dysfunction we had would sort of fall away. All the weird ways that we interact with one another to get things surreptitiously or to try to get better than somebody else, or the angers that we have towards ourselves, they just sort of dissolve if you're fully worthy, fully safe, and fully loved. And the truth of the matter is, most of us are. but we just cannot understand that. We just cannot feel that. We just have the stories in the back of our head of like the movie we once saw that made us feel unsafe for the rest of our life.
Yeah.
And when you come into contact with being fully safe, fully worthy, and fully loved, everything starts to change. And, as a therapist, I would have people come into my office and I would do an exercise that said, you know, you are worthy. And then they're like, well, I don't know that I'm worthy. I'm like, okay, well, let's start at ground zero. Are babies worthy? Of course babies are worthy. Were you worthy as a baby? Maybe. It's like, hold on. We just said that all babies were worthy. Like that was an easy thing for you to say. What made you different as a baby? Nothing except the perception that we're not supposed to think of ourselves as fully worthy. And I do exercises for self-love, and people would have no difficulty shining love towards somebody else, but so much difficulty shining love towards themselves for no actual practical reason.
Yeah.
We are all fully worthy of self-love, but we have these beliefs that for some reason we're not allowed to have it or we're not good enough. I can tell you, every single person listening to the podcast, unless you've gone and killed somebody or done like, an egregious harm on another person that should have landed you in jail, you are all fully lovable and fully worthy. And you just have to allow yourself to know that and to experience that and to let the dysfunction that comes from misperception about the way that you exist in the world dissolve.
Yeah. So true. So true. And this reminds me of an exercise that I did at a Tony Robbins event. It's where you identify what your primary question is. It's part of Date with Destiny. Have you ever been to Date with Destiny?
I have not.
Okay. It's an amazing event. I met my wife there. So
that was a date with destiny.
It
wow.
was, yes, in so many levels, yes. Now, the primary question exercise is where you are trying to figure out what is the question that kind of runs your life, that runs in the background, that you're barely even able to perceive. Probably not even able to perceive. It's too much at an unconscious level. Like, for example, I'm not safe. How do I stay safe? Mike, that might be a question. So the question, the statement, I'm not safe, is not the thing that's so insidious. It's the primary question that we have that's related to that, which is, how do I stay safe? So if that's the first question that comes into your mind when you are entering a room, when you are arriving at a party, when you are heading towards your car to drive home, those questions can just destroy any sense of happiness or fulfillment because you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. So this primary question exercise allowed me to see that I was looking for the other shoe to drop in a different way than safety. But then you have to rewire that with a better question that better serves you and makes you happier. And that was a really profound part of the Date with Destiny event. So I'm curious if you've heard of that exercise.
I haven't heard of that exercise specifically, but that's very, very, very telling. And we definitely go throughout the world, with that framing. And one of the things that meditation helps you do is to finally see your framing and finally listen to your dialogue and finally hear the question that you're asking yourself over and over and over again and just say, nope, I don't need to go there anymore. Meditation is like going to the gym for your brain, where you train yourself out of those old patterns because you can see them and because you can now make a different choice, which is not to follow those thoughts, to just come back to your breath, to come back to a completely neutral center.
Right. And that actually can be your, not just therapy, but your medicine. Because a lot of people will get prescribed medications from like a psychiatrist, and yet they could solve it through other means. Like I went to Dr. Daniel Amen, to Amen Clinics. Had him on the show.
You have done it all. That's awesome.
You
must have so much fun with all this.
I love biohacking, and I do have the means to try a lot of different things, so it's pretty awesome. And my wife is big into this too, because of course we both met at a Tony Robbins event that we had signed up for, and it was kind of like birds of a feather sort of situation where we're both into self-development and everything. But I also believe that that she's my soulmate, and the Creator brought us together, and lots of kind of spiritual metaphysical beliefs about it too. But uh, this shared journey that we're on, where we're constantly improving and iterating ourselves, exchanging versions, as Donnie Epstein likes to say, it's pretty awesome. So yeah, I did the SPECT scan and all that sort of stuff as part of Amen Clinics. And one thing that they explained to me is that I tend to ruminate. Also, Dr. Andrew Hill explained this to me too when he looked at my EEG from doing Peak Brain Institute, is that I get caught in these loops. And what Dr. Amen calls it is a diamond pattern. So there's certain areas of the brain that are more active, and it forms a diamond when you look at it on a three-dimensional map of your brain. So then you get stuck in this loop, and you ruminate back and forth. And so you could take medications for this, like it could be prescription drugs, or it could be just something like GABA-Calm, which is just herbal kind of supplement that doesn't require prescription to quiet the brain, or you could just meditate, right?
Yeah, and there's some cases in which prescription drugs are really helpful, and a combination therapy is always useful. But for most of us, just with average rumination, meditation really is the thing that helps you understand and get yourself out of rumination. So when you're ruminating, you have a hyperactive, it's called default mode network. It's the part of your brain, your posterior cingulate cortex and your prefrontal cortex speak to one another in this loop that's called the default mode. And when you put somebody in a brain scanner and tell them to just be yourself, no particular instruction, just rest, you see activation in this default mode network. And in ruminators, you see hyperactivation in this default mode network. Now, when you put somebody who's meditated for a long time in a scanner, what you see is a decrease in activation in this default mode network. So meditation is actually working on the part of your brain responsible for rumination and decreasing its activity. And in, spiritual talk, we talk about the monkey mind. And it turns out that this monkey mind actually has a neural correlate. And as you meditate, you quiet that monkey mind. You quiet the chatter inside your head. You quiet the rumination. And you quiet the habit of rumination, because rumination is a habit. And so you learn a different activity that breaks that habit cycle.
Oh, wow. It just occurred to me that, so oneness is what I went and did in India, and had that spiritual awakening. So the monks explained that the divine is an experience, not a belief, and that was a really profound idea, a concept for me that I wouldn't have been that receptive to prior to having the experience of the divine. But it was just amazing. But they call it oneness meditation. It is a form of meditating. So you might think, well, TM isn't for me, or mindfulness meditation isn't for me. I've tried that a few times and it's boring, or I just can't really do it. I'm just not any good at it, or whatever. But there are many forms of meditation that you could apply and quiet that monkey mind, connect to a higher power, to the fabric of creation, or to a higher purpose, or to just the oneness, right?
Yeah, and there are so many forms of meditation, and they can be taken at various different levels. So, the focused attention practice that I described, on one hand, is an incredibly secular practice that is training your brain to increase your focused attention, which takes you out of your ruminating mind, which lets you quiet your negative and frustrating thoughts, which lets you decrease your stress and improve your physiology. For some people, that is just a secular practice, and it has incredible secular benefits. For other people, when you quiet that mind, it then allows you to access higher states and come into contact with an experience of oneness and with the understanding that we are all connected. So, meditation is an extraordinary tool that can take you in so many different directions depending on what you need at that moment in your life, or what you're searching for.
Right. And you just have to choose it. That's the thing, is like, you can know about it and you can say, wow, this was a really interesting episode. I got some good knowledge or ideas out of that, but you don't apply it. You don't actually practice the practice, and nothing really changes, right?
It's literally why we made Muse. As a therapist, I would always tell my patients to meditate. I sucked at meditation, so I'd teach them to meditate, but like I really couldn't realistically expect them to go do it successfully because I was having difficulty doing it. And as we made Muse, the idea was to make a tool that you could just hand to somebody and say, "Here, go meditate, use this thing." And it would teach you. So Muse guides you. It shows you what to do. It shows you in that state of your focused attention. It gives you data. It lets you see your progress, and it tells you that you're doing it right. And so now there are literally thousands of doctors, psychotherapists, life coaches who, instead of telling their patients to go meditate, just hand them a Muse. And there are hundreds of thousands of people all around the world that have either started their practice from nothing with Muse and they're finally like, oh, wow, now I can meditate, or are, intermediate or expert meditators who've been able to build a deeper and better practice using the tool. So we deeply believed that if more people meditated, people's individual lives would be better and ultimately the world would be a better place. And so if we were like, how can we, best impact the world? It was to making a tool that would finally make meditation easy, actionable, science and technology oriented, and give you real data so you could start and enhance your practice.
And I think most importantly, to create a habit that sticks.
Yes.
And I recently interviewed BJ Fogg, who's one of the top experts in the world on habit formation. And it turns out there is an emotion, a feeling that was previously unnamed until BJ named it, and that's called shine. That's that feeling of success. And if you inadvertently build into an app or a tool or a resource the lack of shine, or the opposite of shine, right? So let's say the Way of Life app, I used to be just a big proponent of. I loved it. Allowed you to create these long green chains of your new habit, right? But then you'd miss a day, and then you put an X in the box for that day, and the shine's gone. And then I would feel bad about the next day missing it. Now I have another red box, and I would stop using the app. And it wasn't until I understood what shine was that I'm like, that's why I don't use that app, because I was not enjoying the feeling of putting a red box in there. And what Muse does is it enhances and focuses on the shine without the negative side effect of giving you no shine when you mess up, right? So you're actually getting rewarded with recoveries for coming back to quiet mind. You're getting these little birds when you stay in a quiet mind for a period of time, and you get points for just doing the practice at all. And it just feels like shine is all over the place in the app and in the device. And I don't know if you recognized that when you were building the tool, the interface, and everything, but you did a fantastic job of that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's my amazing product team led by Alec. I don't know that we were consciously thinking of shine, but definitely understanding the need to reinforce people. If we're in an exercise that is supposed to feel good, because so often meditation feels bad. You sit down, you're like, I suck at this, and then you think you suck, and then meditation is terrible. And once you change the lens and you change the wording to a place where you come where you are supported and where you want to come back every day and you want to continue to see your success, it really changes it. And we have a community now called the Muse community, where we have 9,000 people who support each other. They share their stats, they share their improvements, and you get the community going, raw, that rocks. Mm-hmm. We have individualized coaching. So, if you don't want to do it in the community setting, there's a person that you can speak to every week who will encourage you along your journey with Muse and meditation. And so there's so many ways that we've, we have challenges, monthly challenges that you sign up to so that you stay on track and you stay motivated with, the power of social dynamics. So there's so many ways that we've built scaffolding to help you start and establish your practice, because meditation is amazing, but only if you do it regularly.
Yeah. So that's why it's called a practice. And
yes.
So one thing that it occurs to me is it's almost like you're building up the muscle, like mental muscle, that you can then use to have a breakthrough. Like, for example, when you had that breakthrough, looking back and recognizing that movie was the source of a lot of your internal strife, turmoil that was created by this false belief. And that also, by the way, reminds me of a recent interview I did of Elliot Rowe, who's like a mindset expert, works with high stakes poker players and professional athletes and so forth. And what he told me was he, through hypnotherapy, discovered that at 3 years old, his father showed him a photo of, or he saw a photo on of an airplane on the mantle, and he asked his dad about it, and his dad explained, well, that plane doesn't exist anymore. It crashed, and my business partners died in that crash. And at an impressionable 3 years old, he took that on, and he ended up developing a fear of flying, which was preventing him from living his dream, and it was really limiting him. So that fear of flying was severe, and he had no idea why he had it until a hypnotherapy session unlocked this memory of a 3-year-old Elliot seeing that photo and having that explained to him, that the plane is gone and two people that were close friends and business partners of his dad's were gone too. Amazing, right? That this is just sitting in our subconscious, driving our lives, kind of in the driver's seat, and we don't even realize it.
Yeah. So one of the things that we always talk about in meditation is how it takes you off autopilot. We all just assume we're supposed to be subject to the stuff that's in our mind. Our minds think, and that creates us, and that's the experience we have. And what meditation is extraordinary at doing is taking you off of autopilot, so that you're no longer just subject to the unconscious drives and thoughts that, drive your life daily. You can now put yourself in the driver's seat. You can make choices. You can identify the things that are driving you, and you can say, nope, don't want that. Yeah, do want this. And that leads to incredible focus, incredible ability to achieve what you want when you are the one driving it.
Yeah, so true. All right. So if there was something that I should have asked you but didn't, what would that be?
Oh, there's so many fun things. So I love talking about the neuroscience of mindfulness, if you want to dive in for another minute.
Yeah, let's do it.
So it's easy to think about meditation as a spiritual thing or as a woo-woo thing, but actually meditation is something that has extraordinary impact on your brain. And when we look at studies of expert meditators, what we see is an increase in thickness in the prefrontal cortex. So from the lab of Dr. Sarah Lazar, she took expert meditators and put them in a scanner, and she saw that they had an increase in their prefrontal cortex thickness even as they aged, to the point where one 50-year-old had the prefrontal cortex thickness of about a 25-year-old.
Wow.
So yes, and as we know, our prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain responsible for planning, organization, and our higher order processing. We also see in brains of meditators a decrease in the amygdala. That's the area of our brain that creates the fight or flight response. And so as you meditate, you're able to downregulate all of those fears and anxieties that you have, and it actually can lead to a physical change in the structure of your brain. In novice meditators, you can see a decrease in the activity. In an expert long-term meditator, you can even potentially see a change in the size of the amygdala. Meditation can increase our corpus callosum, our connection between the left and right hemisphere. We can see an increase in the temporal parietal junction, which is the part of your brain responsible for empathy and perspective taking. And in possibly the most amazing study of the brain in meditation, Dr. Sarah Lazar was able to show that just 8 weeks of meditation could increase the gray matter of an individual. So the gray matter is the number of connections inside your brain, and Einstein had more gray matter than the average individual. So meditation is really unbelievably impactful. In the study by Dr. Eileen Luders, she showed that a long-term meditator had a brain that looked 7.5 years younger than a non-meditator. And she defined as long-term meditator as somebody who'd only meditated for 5 years. So if you think you don't have time to meditate, think about what an extraordinary investment that is. 5 years can get you 7.5 years off your life if you're anything like the people in her study.
That's awesome. And it reminds me of this concept that there's this longevity escape velocity. If you just live long enough, you'll get each year that you live back in extended lifespan because of the enhancements and advances in technology for relating to health and longevity. That concept comes from Peter Diamandis, and it's almost like you're getting that, but with the youthfulness of your brain. By just spending that time meditating, you get years back of a young, youthful and powerful brain.
Potentially. I mean, it can't solve everything in your life, but it can make a whole lot of things a little bit better.
Yeah.
In really impactful ways.
Very cool. So we're out of time, but if our listener wanted to take a first step in this process, it's probably to go buy a Muse headband. Where should they go? Like what sort of websites and resources? I'm guessing choosemuse.com is where you would send them, but you tell me.
Yeah, so you can go to choosemuse.com and you can find Muse there. Muse is, as we've just talked about, a tool that can both help you start meditating and give you real-time feedback on your heart, your breath, your body, and your brain during meditation. So you're getting real data on all of these systems. You're understanding how they shift and change. You're able to hack them, and you're able to see their improvement every single day as you meditate. I also have a podcast, Untangle, where we interview meditators and particularly neuroscientists to understand more about the brain and how it creates the experience of your life.
Very cool. So I'll include those links in the show notes and all the stuff that we talked about and all the previous episodes that I mentioned. Dr. Andrew Hill, Dave Asprey, 40 Years of Zen CTO, Chris Keene, all that sort of stuff will be on the show notes for this episode, so do check that out. And thank you, Ariel, for sharing your journey and your wisdom and being so open and vulnerable with what you've gone through and your whole evolution as a human and as a soul on this earth. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was my joy and pleasure. And I hope to inspire others to recognize the safety, the love, the certainty that is here and now, and how we can get out of our own ways to just come in contact with it and be.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you, Ariel.